What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. We have a great video for you in store today. We are going to be going through last-minute start-sit decisions for Week 15. We are about an hour and 15 minutes until the start of the Sunday morning games, and I'll be going all the way up until kickoff. So we'll be going through first, I'm going to hit some key news that's coming out for player injuries this week and how that impacts the fantasy players that you're looking at for today. Then I'm going to talk the under 40% start-sit guys that I like for this week, as I've done every week so far this season. Then we will go game by game through the matchups that I like and the players that I would recommend starting. So as always, if you have any questions, that takes top priority in this show. So drop any questions that you have in the chat. I will hit those first once you drop a comment. But if not, I will continue through the program of games that I have going here. So in just a sec, I'm going to get something set up real quick. But as always, subscribe to the channel. Let's see if we can get to 700 subscribers by the end of the season. And we'll be doing all that we can to help you win a fantasy football championship this season. So we're in the playoffs now. Hopefully you didn't have too much invested in that Thursday night game because it was pretty rough. But if you did, let's say you started Cooper Kupp, it's not over for you. There's a lot of opportunity for you to come back. And I'll be talking start-sit decisions that you can make for each of these players. So the big news that has come out so far today, we'll hit this real quick, then we'll go into specific players that I like that are lightly rostered. The big news is that Breece Hall is playing today. He's kind of battled a knee injury all week, but he is going to play against Jacksonville. And because of that, I like him as a start. Even if Breece Hall was not going to play, I was going to recommend Braylon Allen as a start. But now that Breece Hall is good to go, you can safely plug him in your lineups. I'm not concerned about his ability to produce against a terrible defense in the Jacksonville Jaguars. David Njoku is out, which is expected. So not really a great replacement within the Browns themselves. But with David Njoku out, you can pivot to some other tight ends who I'll talk about in a little bit, not talk to them. Sorry. Kenneth Walker is not going to play. So Zach Charbonnet, number one running back on the week last week, you could plug him back in with confidence against Green Bay tonight. Make sure if you do have space for him, though, try to see if you could put him in the flex just in case anything happens injury-wise, just to cover yourself in case of last-minute options. And then some other news, the big one is Tony Pollard. If I have not gotten a final report that's confirmed that he's playing, although all reports are that he is going to play. And that's important because if he is not going to go for whatever reason, then Tajay Spears, if he happens to be out there, you must pick him up and you must start him this week. So that's the big injury news so far that's come out. And if anything comes out during, I'll update you as it comes in. But this is going to be more so focused on the individual games and players. So if I miss something that breaks right away, just bear with me. But I will have all the information that you need for these games in terms of who to start and who to sit. And as always, drop a comment and whatever comments or questions that you have about your lineup, who you're going to start or you're going to sit, that's going to take priority. All right. Less than 40% rostered streams for this week. I'm going to be talking stash, stream, and an honorable mention player that is under 40% rostered. So we'll go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and a flex. So my stash for this week among the less than 40% rostered quarterbacks is Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston, up and down, he has had, number one overall quarterback on the week type performances like he did against Denver, or he could be kind of mediocre like he was last week against Pittsburgh. And Kansas City is not by any means a great matchup, but I love him as a stash heading into week 16 because he plays Cincinnati in week 16, which is a common theme among these streaming players that I talk about, is to pick up the ones that are going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Jameis Winston, this is the perfect matchup for him in week 16 to be facing Cincinnati. I imagine this is going to be one of the highest scoring weeks on the season. Cincinnati's defense is terrible, and Jameis Winston is the type of quarterback who can take advantage of that. Because more than likely, Cincinnati should win this game, and because of that, Cleveland's going to be behind. They're going to be using Jameis's arm to try to catch up. I imagine this is going to be a great performance for Jameis Winston and the other Cleveland Browns players, which I will be talking about in a little bit as well. My start for this week among the and Jameis, by the way, is, before I get to the next player, is only 20.5% rostered. So great pickup ahead of week 16. My start among the quarterbacks that are less than 40% rostered is Bryce Young. I've not talked about him much. He's less than 5% rostered, actually, 4.9% in ESPN leagues. He's facing the Dallas Cowboys this week. Bryce Young has been playing a lot better as of late. Over the last few weeks, his numbers have been as follows. So last 4 games that they played, he's had 12 points against the Giants, 16 against the Chiefs, 23 against Tampa, and 12.5 against Philly, which is respectable. So these performances are not killing you by any means. He's not dipping below 10 in the last 4 weeks, and he gets Dallas, which is a very favorable matchup. The other thing I like about Bryce Young as somebody that is that he's somebody that you can look into long-term as well, because he's playing Tampa Bay, who we had that 23-point game against 2 weeks ago. He gets them again in week 17. So Bryce Young, he's starting to find his groove. I think this is a great pickup that you could start this week. If you're really in a pinch, you need somebody to catch up due to injury, something like that, that's keeping you from playing your starting quarterback. I think Bryce Young is a good pivot that you can go to this week if you're really in a pinch for this first week of the playoffs. And then honorable mention, this guy kind of let us down last week. I was really high on him and his string of matchups. He gets Cincinnati this week. It's Will Levis. I still think you could go back to Will Levis again, and he would be a great play this week. He gets Cincinnati, who I've already mentioned is a terrible defense, and he should have a pretty good performance. Kind of let us down against Jacksonville, but Cincinnati's defense is honestly worse than Jacksonville, and I think Will Levis will be fine for this week. All right, question from Frank NCO. What's up, man? DJ Moore, Breece Hall, or Tyrone Tracy in the flex? Who's in your wide receiver and running back spots right now? Because of those 3, I would prefer to play Breece Hall, but I'm curious who your other players that you're planning to play this week are. Next, we will go to the running backs that are lightly rostered that I would recommend to stash for this week. So first, this one is kind of a little bit of a cop-out, but for running backs to stash, it's your handcuff. And what I mean by that is that there's tons of handcuffs that are still out there that are lightly rostered. And if I were you, what I would try to do is just stash whatever running back is tied to your RB1 or RB2. So as I've mentioned, Kenneth Gainwell has been out there for weeks and weeks and weeks not being rostered. Same with guys like Algier, like for Derrick Henry, you're talking Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, Kyron Williams, Blake Corum, etc. So make sure for my stash that you get all the handcuff guys. His RBs are Kyron Williams and Achane. Yeah, you can't really do anything with Kyron because you already played him. Receivers are Justin Jefferson and Jamar. 10-man league. Well, you got elite receivers in that case. So I think if I were you, Frank, what I would do is go with Breece Hall. I think this is going to be a great week for him this week. He gets the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm pretty confident that he's going to be able to run wild on them. And I also think he gives you probably the safest floor among those players as well. DJ Moore is not bad. Maybe if you're in like a full PPR, you might consider him, but I would prefer to go with Breece Hall with this matchup that he has. So what I would do, Frank, is I would play Breece Hall in your flex. And I think with Justin Jefferson and Jamar, I feel pretty confident that you'll be able to have a good week with that group. Let me know, how's your team been doing, by the way? I know that you made a couple like big trades of late. I'm kind of curious like how you're looking in terms of the playoffs and everything. Okay, so my start among the lightly rostered running backs is my entire team has been based off your videos. Oh, no problem. Happy to help you out. And if you got any other questions, feel free to drop it in the comments. Okay, my lightly rostered running backs is Sincere McCormick. he is one of the biggest sleepers, I think, rest of the season in terms of just the schedule that they have. So he's not only taken on a big role in terms of his role on the team. He's taken over the starting running back position now, but he gets a pretty nice schedule coming up as well, especially in week 16 and 17. So this week he gets Atlanta, which is not anything like spectacular necessarily in terms of a running matchup. But then he gets Jacksonville in week 16, which I just talked about with Breece Hall, is an excellent matchup. And then he gets New Orleans, which has been a terrible run defense for most of the season as well. So Sincere McCormick, to me, is one of the biggest sleepers that you could take advantage of. The other thing is that the Raiders, they're trying out their team for next year. They're trying to make sure that they're building their team around Bowers. Hopefully Shedeur Sanders in their case, if they're trying to go for the number one pick. And Sincere McCormick is only 31% rostered. So check to see if he is out there, because I think he could be a real difference maker for you in the playoffs, especially with the Jacksonville and New Orleans matchups. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm glad you enjoyed the videos. And yeah, definitely. You're from Cleveland. I'm actually from Cincinnati originally. So yeah, I'm glad to have another Ohio guy on this channel. Yeah, I'm glad your team's doing well too. That's awesome. So I actually haven't really spent a whole lot of time in Cleveland, to be honest. I've gone up there a little bit for some like Indians games, but I need to spend some more time in North Ohio because it seems cool from what I've liked everybody that I've met from up there. 9-5 in third place. That's a good spot to be in. I mean, especially if you could like take this week, I think you're in like good spot, because if you have like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, I think that you pretty much got a ceiling as high as anybody for the playoffs. So yeah, great work, and hope you have a good week this week. And then another honorable mention stash at running backs is Kamani Vidal. So I was high on him earlier in the season, but he is he's kind of been buried a little bit behind J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, but now Gus Edwards is struggling. They get a great matchup today defensively against Tampa Bay. There's a good chance with Kamani Vidal. He's getting more touches over the last few weeks. His carry count went up to 8 this past week. So I think there's a good chance they may try to incorporate Vidal more. So if you're really in a pinch, I would not be surprised if this is the game where he actually takes off. Now, I don't think that would make me want to start him unless you're really desperate and you're in the very deep leagues. But I think Kamani Vidal is another one of those players, much like Sincere McCormick, who could really take over these next couple weeks and be an excellent late season bloomer who could really make a difference for you in the fantasy playoffs. Yeah, I would go with Joe Burrow, Frank. I think that I know Tua has been great, but to me, nobody has other than like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and those guys. Like, you're not going to get that type of ceiling with Tua that you could get with Joe Burrow. So I would go with Joe, especially in this game against Tennessee Titans. Remember, Jaden Daniels had an excellent game against Tennessee not too long ago. So I expect Joe Burrow is just going to take off rest of the season. They need him and Chase to go off. And the fact that you already have Chase, I think that just gives you a huge leg up if you can play that stack. No problem, anytime. All right, so we're at the wide receivers now. So the wide receivers that I'm looking at as a stash for this week is Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders. As I mentioned, they have a nice schedule week 16 and 17 against Jacksonville and New Orleans. They actually have the number one schedule for wide receivers. And I think that this team is going to be making business decisions, which I'm going to talk about with some other players in a little bit. They're trying to go get the number one pick in the draft. So they may be sitting guys like Jacoby Myers. So because of that, there's a good chance that Trey Tucker, because of that number one strength of schedule and the team opting to sit some of its better players that are veterans, they may try to play Trey Tucker more, give him a tryout for next season. I think this could be a real opportunity for him to be a stash player that you want to look at for future weeks. I'm not sure if I really like him this week against Atlanta as somebody that you want to play, but I think he's an excellent stash candidate if you have room for him. Next, my start for this week, also on Monday night among the wide receivers, is Ray McCloud. Atlanta is very similarly in a situation where they've been struggling as of late in terms of, Kirk Cousins' production has not been great. But I think there's a real chance that they could get Ray McCloud involved some more. And he's really been a pretty consistent player for them in recent weeks. He had 11 targets last week. And I'm going to pull up his stats in just a sec for you guys. But he's been a pretty consistent target for Kirk Cousins. And I think there's a real opportunity for him, especially in this game on Monday night against Las Vegas, that he could be a great stream for you. So over the past 3 weeks, he's had at least 6 targets every game. You love to see that among wide receivers. Against Minnesota last week, he had 11 targets, as I said, 8 for 98. He's also had over 90 yards the past 2 games, going all the way back to the Chargers game in week 13. And he's got some great matchups coming up the next few weeks as well. He gets the Giants in week 16 and then Washington in week 17, which is defense has gotten a little bit better, but still not by any means a great pass defense. So for a player that over the last 4 out of the last 5 games, he's had at least 10 full PPR fantasy points. Ray McCloud to me is a great start. If you're really in a pinch for the fantasy playoffs, I would be putting him into my lineup for this week as a great start candidate. An honorable mention is Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson very similarly has kind of been like a B-tier version of Ray McCloud in a sense that he's been very reliable for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that in this particular game against New England, I would not be surprised if he has another great game for you. So we'll pull up Michael Wilson's numbers. So he is the second wide receiver on the Cardinals, for those of you who are not too familiar with him. And over the last 4 games, he's had 4, 7, and 3 targets. So, maybe not as great necessarily as Ray McCloud in terms of the target count. But in the last 3 games, he's had at least 50 yards. So that's great. So you want to see guys that are getting at least 50 yards. And then in the last 3 games, 7, 10, and 13 full PPR points. So this is great if you're looking for guys that you want to pick up to start at wide receiver that are lightly rostered. Michael Wilson is another great option for you against New England. And then he gets Carolina next week, so even better. While we're on the topic of wide receivers, I'll go through the flex and then I'll go through the tight end after that. So my stashes among the wide receivers that you want to look at, I'm going to hit on this Cleveland Browns-Cincinnati matchup again because it's just those guys are out there. They're excellent pickups for you. Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman. Both those guys are playing the Cincinnati Bengals in week 16, and they're both under 40% rostered. Tillman dealing with injuries, so we got to see how he's doing coming into this next week. But both these guys are excellent starts for week 16, so I'd be stashing them now, trying to get Elijah Moore, especially Moore before. I think Moore could have a really good game this week, in particular against Kansas City. So I'd be trying to get Elijah Moore this week, and then Cedric Tillman is somebody I'm looking at early for the week 16 waivers, is somebody I want to pick up. Starts among the less than 40% rostered guys, Wan'Dale Robinson. So for Wan'Dale specifically, I think that this is a player that's been extremely frustrating on the season. He's gotten a lot of targets, hasn't really broken it out into a lot of points, and the quarterback play has definitely hurt him. But again, 11 targets last week against New Orleans, 4 for 38. That's not great necessarily. And, he kind of had a dud game against Dallas, which kind of took him off the fantasy radar. But if you're looking for a consistent floor play with a great matchup against Baltimore, which has been a passive defense that has just given up tons of points to wide receivers, I think this is a great play. I think that there'll be a way that the Giants could still find enough volume for him to get involved. And in a full PPR league, I think Wan'Dale Robinson is a good pivot to start at wide receiver or your flex. Honorable mention, Josh Palmer. This one I would like more if Ladd McConkey was not going to play. But Josh Palmer stepping up more than he has in recent weeks. And another game this past week where he had 9 targets, 6 for 78. He gets Tampa Bay this week, so a great matchup for wide receivers as well. So Josh Palmer, if you want to have a dart throw, getting a little more involved, developing more rapport with Justin Herbert in this particular offensive scheme, I think Josh Palmer could be a good play against Tampa Bay. Now we will go to the tight end position. And very similarly, I talked about the Raiders and business decisions. And part of why I have Michael Mayer in my photo for today among stashes is that I think I would not be surprised at all. And I'm talking about specifically for those leagues that are week 17 and 18 championships. There is a good chance that they sit Brock Bowers when they get to the final 2 games of the season. Because, Brock Bowers is one of their best assets that they have. I don't think that they want to be risking that out on the field, especially when they're down to Desmond Ridder as quarterback. And they have, a lot of things that are just not going well for them this season. They want to be setting themselves up for that number 1 overall pick to get Shadur Sanders. So I think there's a good chance that the Raiders are going to sit Brock Bowers. We've already seen Michael Mayer be productive, even with Bowers in the game. So I'll pull up his stats from 2 weeks ago. But Michael Mayer, in this this last week against Tampa Bay, he was 7 for 68 and 9 targets. And that's with Brock Bowers in the lineup. So I think there's a great chance that Michael Mayer could be a stash that could really help you at the end of the season, because he's got, again, Jacksonville and New Orleans in those last 2 games. So I've been talking about these Raiders quite a bit. I think there's a good chance that if you're looking for a tight end that could really win you your week 17, if they sit Brock Bowers, this is probably one of the best tight ends that you can get given the matchups that they have. So keep an eye on this situation. Especially if you have Brock Bowers, I'd be making sure that if you have space to have Michael Mayer to handcuff him. But if not, I think this is a very underrated pickup that could really be a tight end that wins you some championships. And as always, if you have any questions, ask those first, and I will get to those right away. But the purpose of this is to help you with your last-minute decisions, but I'll be talking through the players that I like to start and sit on the program that I have if there are no questions. But if you have a question, drop it below. We've got less than an hour until the game starts, so ask any questions you got. And we'll do what we can to help you win this week and get to the semifinals of your fantasy championships. Hopefully, if you guys are in week 15 championship, hopefully you guys are starting your playoffs in weeks 15 and not 16. So that way you're not relying on that week 18 championship game. But anyway, ask your questions first, and I'll get to that right away. And if not, I'll continue with the start sits. A start among the lightly rostered tight ends. Of all the tight ends that you could get, I talked about Michael Mayer earlier, but I think one of the best starts you can get for this week is Brenton Strange for Jacksonville. Remember, Evan Ingram was highly utilized in his role with Mac Jones and with Trevor Lawrence as a hyper-targeted tight end because of the way the offense is set up under Doug Peterson. And now that Evan Ingram is out for the season, we could really see an uptick in Brenton Strange's numbers that I think he would be a great start among the lightly rostered tight ends. He's got Las Vegas in week 16, so that's great. But in this particular game against the Jets, I think that Brenton Strange will give you enough targets and hopefully receptions that make him a reliable start that you can play for this week. And then an honorable mention as well, this one is a lot riskier to me, is Stone Smart. Stone Smart is very lightly rostered. He's only 2.2% rostered, but he gets the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think there's a good chance with Will Disley now being out as well and the great matchup that they have that Stone Smart could be used as a check down option and could be a very sneaky start for this week. All right, so that completes everything for our under 40% rostered guys. If you got any questions about your lineups heading into the last hour before the 1 o'clock games start, drop it in the chat, and I will get to that right away. And if not, we will go to our first matchup of the week, which is the Dallas Cowboys and the Carolina Panthers. So Cooper Rush, this is a good stream option in 2 quarterback leagues to play Cooper Rush. However, I would not recommend playing him in 1 quarterback leagues. Rico Dowdle, on the other hand, though, is a great start for this week. And I think Rico Dowdle falls into that tier among top 15 to 20 running backs that I would be trying to play and get into my lineup. Among the wide receivers of the Cowboys, CD Lamb is a must start. The other guys are not really in consideration for me because there's just too much target dispersal for me to trust any of those guys. I think Ferguson is an okay tight end start, but he really has been kind of disappointing despite the opportunity that's available to him on this team. So Ferguson is in that range of like a tight end 15 to me for this week. That like he's not one of the better options that you can have, but he's still a decent stream option to play. Now, compared to like the Brenton Stranges, who I just talked about, I'd probably prefer to go Jake Ferguson. But at the same time, I think Ferguson is really very mid to me this week as a tight end start. So those of you that are in the chat, drop any questions that you have about your lineups last minute in the chat or anything else you want to talk about in regards to your team, and I'll get to that right away. If not, I'll keep going through this Cowboys and Panthers game. Brandon Aubrey, great kicker for this week. Cowboys defense would not be playing them. Bryce Young, as I mentioned earlier, is an excellent start for this week. He is among the lightly rostered players, was my start of the week. He's only 5% rostered, but he gets a great matchup against the Cowboys. He's been playing better as of late. So if you want to rewind it, I talk this video a little bit. I talk why Bryce Young should be a good start for this week. But yeah, I think among the lightly rostered quarterbacks, one of the better options you could have. Chuba Hubbard is a great running back start as well. The other thing with Chuba Hubbard is with the Jonathan Brooks injury, this guy got 26 carries last week. So especially going into this matchup against Dallas, one of the best that you can have. And like I said earlier with Bryce Young, getting Tampa Bay in week 17 for Chuba is one of the better running back matchups too. Tyrone Tracy or Jacoby Myers at the flex. I would not count on O'Connell being able to play for Monday. What are your other is this a full PPR league or a half PPR league, Dylan? Jacoby Myers is an okay play, but the fact that he's playing on Monday night versus Tyrone Tracy, if you don't have any other pivot options, I think that's a big consideration as well. Full. Okay. Do you have any other players playing on Monday night? Because Jacoby Myers should be able to go, but I think that I would probably be playing it safe with Tyrone Tracy, to be honest with you, because I have a lot of questions with Desmond Ridder. So let me know if you have any other guys you could pivot to on Monday night. But if not, I would prefer to just lock in Tyrone Tracy. All right, question from Taylor Childers, sorry. Full PPR, Brian Thomas Jr. or Malik Neighbors? Okay, yeah, Dylan, I would just go with Tracy then in that case, because if anything, the injuries with the Raiders, if you don't have any other guys that you could pivot to, I would just prefer to lock it in with guys that you know can play. No problem, Dylan. All right, back to Taylor's question. So that's a tough situation because both those teams are similar situations where the quarterback play is so bad, but the very talented receivers that get a lot of targets. Let me take a look at something real quick. So my gut feeling is to go with Brian Thomas Jr. He gets the Jets, and then Malik Neighbors gets the Baltimore Ravens. Do you have any other, Taylor, do you have any other, he'd have to come off my taxi. Yeah. Oh, you're in one of those like taxi leagues where it's like you have like multiple like you have like a rookie squad or something like that. I think, like, to be honest with you, I would probably prefer to go Neighbors with that matchup against Baltimore. Neighbors has been playing okay as of late anyway. I just think there's such a huge like floor, or like a really low floor with Mac Jones that you could see with Brian Thomas Jr. though. So I think Malik Neighbors is a safer play. Let me know who your other wide receivers are, because I'm curious if there's any way you could play both of them or play other guys. Back to the Panthers in the Cowboys-Panthers game. Adam Thielen, great start for this week. That is somebody that I think Adam Thielen, if he's like in the consideration to play over those guys, I would really put thought into playing Thielen over Brian Thomas or Malik Neighbors. You have Thielen and Lamb. Okay, so you're playing them. And then what I would probably do in that case is go with Neighbors. Okay, yeah. So what you're saying is that you have Thielen and Lamb and your wide receivers, and then for your flex, I would probably. I'm assuming that's what you're saying, Taylor. So what I would do in that case is probably play Thielen, Lamb, and Neighbors, and then Brian Thomas Jr. I'd probably sit with the Sauce Gardner matchup and with Mac Jones deficiencies. So the other Panthers wide receivers, those are interesting stashes. Like Xavier Legette is somebody that you'd like to have rostered, but probably not want to play. Until we start seeing a blow-up performance from Xavier Legette, he's been too up and down to trust in lineups. Jatavion Sanders is an interesting name, and he gets that Tampa Bay matchup, which is great. But I want to see him get more involved. This past week when he came back, he really didn't do anything. Eddie Pinheiro and the Panthers defense, not really interested in playing them for this week. So our next matchup that we have, and if you guys have any other questions, drop it in the chat, and I'll get to that right away. If not, we'll go through the rest of the matchups. Patrick Mahomes is a decent play this week against Cleveland. I like him around the quarterback 12 to 15 range. So if you're in leagues big enough to play him, Patrick Mahomes is a great start. I'd probably go Mahomes over Bryce Young, to be honest with you. But I think that in this particular game against Cleveland, Mahomes is pretty good, but Bryce Young may have a leg on him in that week 17 matchup because Mahomes is getting Pittsburgh that weekend. Isaiah Pacheco, I would be trying to sit Pacheco, to be honest, because I just really am not confident that he's going to get a full workload that's going to make him a great start for this week. Kareem Hunt is really at this point just kind of a handcuff to Pacheco. I really have a hard time seeing both these running backs being effective against Cleveland this week. I would not really want to play DeAndre Hopkins, Xavier Worthy, etc. This Chiefs team is they just distribute the ball around so much that really the only ones that you can really be confident playing among the pass catchers is Travis Kelce. Hopkins falls into that tier of the flex considerations guys. So we go back to Taylor's question about, we had Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, Adam Thielen, CeeDee Lamb. All those guys I would play over DeAndre Hopkins. But Hopkins I would play over some of these guys that I talked about in the under 40%, like Wan'Dale Robinson, but would probably go Ray McLeod, honestly, over DeAndre Hopkins for this week. Travis Kelce, you're playing. Keeping an eye on Noah Gray among the tight ends on that team just to see if he is, if he continues to get more involvement or if anything happens to Kelce, Noah Gray becomes a must start every single week tight end. Harrison Butker coming back. Check to see if he's available because he is coming off IR and there's a chance he's still out on waivers and he's a great kicker to pick up. Kansas City Chiefs defense. This is a good week to stream them against Jameis. Pretty much any time a defense is facing Jameis, you always have opportunities for pick sixes, which is great. And if you guys got any questions, drop it below. We've got 40 minutes until the games start. There's the 1 o'clock game starts, so drop any questions you got. Jameis Winston, I think this is an okay start for him against Kansas City. But as I said earlier in the video, you can go back and check it earlier in the video. He is a must roster player because week 16 he is playing Cincinnati. Nick Chubb, I'm sitting. Jerome Ford, I'm sitting. The wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy, to me, I think this is still a great week for Jerry Jeudy despite the matchup and whatever the numbers say. Jerry Jeudy at this point is a must start for the playoffs. Elijah Moore, to me, with all the injuries that they have with Tillman and Njoku, you could really play Elijah Moore as well. So Elijah Moore, one of those names I think that, don't love him as much as somebody like McLeod. But I think that he is a great start for this week as well among those guys that are lightly rostered. So check if he's out there too. Jordan Akins is an interesting name as the Njoku replacement, but I want to see if he actually gets a volume load that's replicable to what Njoku was getting before I trust him in lineups. The Browns now have Riley Patterson as their kicker. They've struggled at kicking all season. I would not be trying to go to a Browns kicker for this week. And the Browns defense, not playing them against Kansas City. Miami and Houston, very underrated game for fantasy points this week. This is a great week to play Tua. There was a question earlier about whether or not to play Tua or Joe Burrow. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but I think Tua is a better start than Patrick Mahomes. Better start than CJ Stroud in the same game. Just looking real quick at some other quarterbacks that are out there that he could be a better start than. Tua is right around. I'd go Tua over Kyler Murray for this week personally. That's another quarterback that's kind of that same range. Tua to me is definitely in the top 5 to 10 quarterbacks for this week for me. Devon Achane, you're starting him every single week. I would be rostering Jay Wright to make sure that you have him as the handcuff to Achane. Tyreek Hill, you can play him this week. Jalen Waddle, to me, is an interesting guy on the fringe because he's dealing with a hamstring injury, but he has seen his target volume increase quite a bit. I think of this game against Houston, you can play Jalen Waddle. I'm just comparing Waddle to, the Brian Thomas's, Malik Neighbors question that Taylor asked earlier. I would not go so far as to play Waddle over those guys because, those are number one wide receivers. Waddle is, a wide receiver 2 or 3 because you're factoring in Jonnu Smith into that equation as well. So something to keep in mind there. But Waddle is an okay play for this week. Jonnu Smith is now a must-start tight end every single week. So he's really been incredible for you in the last couple weeks if you had him. Jason Sanders is a great kicker. I mentioned him as a good stream, especially playing in dome games, a lightly rostered kicker you can pick up. Miami Dolphins defense, I'm going to sit, and same with the Texans defense. CJ Stroud, I'm not going to start him. He's just not shown me anything that makes me want to start him this season, at least since week 2. Joe Mixon, I think that Joe Mixon will be fine. I don't really agree with the projection numbers of him being so high. On Sleeper, it's 8.8. Not 8.8, 18.8. I think Joe Mixon may struggle, but he's still somebody that you want to be putting out there and starting. Nico Collins must start. Tank Dell, I would prefer to go elsewhere than Tank Dell. I'd rather play Jalen Waddle in that same game. I'd rather play DeAndre Hopkins. Dell has just been way too inconsistent for me and has really burned a lot of people this season. Tight ends, Dalton Schultz. That's an okay tight end start if you're looking for the Njoku replacement, but I'd rather go with somebody like Hunter Henry that gets more target volume. And I may even want to take a flyer on Brenton Strange over him as well, for that matter. Fairbairn, check to see if he's available coming off the bye. Great kicker pickup for this week. And sit the Texans defense. All right, so drop any questions you got below. We got about 35 minutes until the games start. Okay, so next we have the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Aaron Rodgers, this is a great week to stream him against Jacksonville. Rodgers been down a lot this season, but I think he'll have a better game against Jacksonville, and you'll be able to play him. Breece Hall just announced earlier today that he is going to start, and I would be starting him in fantasy as well. This is an excellent matchup against Jacksonville, and I know Breece Hall has been down for most of the season, but I would be playing him for this week. Braylon Allen, so I would not start him. But he's somebody that must be rostered with this Breece Hall knees situation. And I think much like what I was talking about earlier with Brock Bowers, I think there's a good chance that Breece Hall sits in weeks 17 and 18, and Braylon Allen is somebody that you want to make sure you have rostered. All right. And then, as always, ask any questions you got about your lineups, and I will get to those right away because we got about 35 minutes until the games start. Devontae Adams, you're starting. Garrett Wilson, you're starting. Alan Lazard, tempting matchup with Jacksonville, but I'm not going to start him personally. I think unless you're in like a DFS situation. So Tyler Conklin is not playing, and this is a good matchup against Jacksonville. I was thinking about including Conklin in my under 40% starts, but now you've got Ruckert and Jeremy Ruckert, and you've got Kenny Yeboah. Kenny Yeboah had a touchdown a few weeks ago. So those are the tight ends that are DFS streams at best. I would not be putting them into my fantasy lineups, especially since this is the playoffs, though. Anders Carlson is an okay kicker stream against Jacksonville. And the Jets defense, they've not been a great unit. If you do have an argument to play them, though, it would be this week against Mac Jones. I would be comfortable doing that. But, yeah, the Jets defense, I think they're, in general, some better defensive streams you can get, though. Mac Jones in this same game, I would not be starting them at all. Take Bigsby up. So of these two running backs, if you've got to pick one to start, I would prefer to go Bigsby, to be honest with you, because he's just getting more opportunity right now than ETN. ETN has been one of the biggest busts in fantasy. So I think the only real value in ETN is if you're in a full PPR league and you just want to stash him and see what happens. But by no means am I playing him right now. I would prefer to give Tank Bigsby a shot, see if he continues to get some more opportunity against this Jets defense, which has not been great necessarily against the run. I would be trying to look to see what Tank Bigsby could do if you got to pick between these two running backs. All right. And then Brian Thomas Jr., question earlier about him. I would be trying to look elsewhere, but based on the volume that he gets, he's still a decent start. I just would prefer to go with guys that have better quarterback play personally. But Brian Thomas Jr. is so talented that even with Mac Jones at quarterback, he still gives you a good ceiling of opportunity despite the quarterback play. Parker Washington has been interesting time to time. He's somebody just to keep an eye on to see if they eventually shut down Brian Thomas for whatever reason, but not somebody I'm putting into my lineup. Brenton Strange, mentioned him earlier. He is a good tight end stream if you're really in a pinch, because I'm expecting that he's going to get quite a bit of volume from Mac Jones. There are better options out there, though, but Brenton Strange, considering that this team is Brian Thomas, and then after that, it's a huge void of opportunity, maybe Strange could take advantage of that. Not looking at the Jacksonville kicker or defense for this week. Okay, so we got about 30 minutes left until the game starts. So ask any questions that you guys got about your lineups and drop it in the chat, and I will get to that first and foremost. But if not, we will go to this Washington and New Orleans game. Washington should dominate this game. So I'm thinking that Jaden Daniels, this is going to be a great week for him. You're playing him pretty much no matter what. Brian Robinson, another great week to start him. Interestingly, so there's kind of a thing with McNichols and Rodriguez in terms of who's the actual backup now that Eckler is injured. To me, it's still McNichols, because remember, Rodriguez had that good game in week 12, or sorry, not week 12, week 14, I guess. Sorry, week 13. They were on the bye week 14. But McNichols is really the second running back on this team. I think that that was the situation that last game where McNichols didn't get as much workload and Rodriguez did because it was the fourth quarter. So if you're looking at McNichols, potentially that could be an interesting, deep league running back to play, because this should be a game where they're going to be up and beating up on the Saints. But I would prefer to stay away from playing either one of these two, because I want to see more of how this second running back develops. But if I had to pick between McNichols or Rodriguez, I would go Jeremy McNichols. McLaurin must play. This game, Noah Brown is out, so there's an opportunity, potentially for a De'Ami Brown in deep leagues, but I would probably go elsewhere. Zach Ertz, this is a great start for Zach Ertz. So of all these fringe tight ends that I've talked about, Zach Ertz is one of the best that you can get that's out there potentially. So check to see if Zach Ertz happens to still be there. Check his roster percentage real quick. It's still only 66.9% rostered. So in some leagues, he's probably out there. And this is one of the tight ends that you definitely want to play if he happens to be there as your Njoku replacement. Not playing Greg Joseph despite this matchup, because in the last game he missed 2 field goals. No, wait a minute. That wasn't Greg Joseph. That was Zane Gonzalez. Greg Joseph is another one of these kickers that's just bounced around so much. I mean, I would want to see how he plays with Washington before you put him in your lineup. The Commanders' defense is one of the best defenses you can get against Jake Haener. Speaking of Jake Haener, I'm not by any means going to play him this week at all. Alvin Kamara is a must start. Keep an eye on Kendre Miller, though, because much like some of these teams I talk about with business decisions, there's a good chance that Alvin Kamara sits rest of season and that Kendre Miller could become the starter by the time you get to the end of the year. So just keep that in mind. Kendre Miller is another great running back stash that could potentially get more opportunity come week 17. Wide receivers. So, yeah, you still have MVS is out there as that, that deep threat. But I would have liked MVS more in terms of his long-term value if Derek Carr stayed healthy. I just really have a lot of question marks about Jake Haener's ability to get him the ball because MVS is pretty much a deep threat only and relies on touchdown volume. And honestly, this may be a game where, I'm not even really sure if New Orleans is going to get a touchdown in this game because it's really it's pretty bleak situation for them on offense right now. Juwan Johnson is interesting just in terms of the depth. They're just the absence of target options that they have at pass catcher. Juwan Johnson has a pretty favorable tight end schedule as well. That's number 3 rest of season. He's an okay streaming option to look into as somebody that you want to pick up and can creep his way into some great fantasy numbers for you for the playoffs. But in general, I just think there are better options than Juwan Johnson because of the quarterback play. And then not looking at Blake Grupe or the Saints defense. All right, so about 27 minutes before the game starts. So ask any questions you got about your lineups before these 1 o'clock games, or if you got any questions in general just about your team or dynasty, fantasy rosters, etc., ask it in the questions below, and I'll get to that right away. Baltimore and the New York Giants. So another very one-sided game. Lamar Jackson, you're starting. Derrick Henry, you're starting with top 3 running back upside. It's really only Saquon. And I think it's probably Derrick Henry and Saquon. Maybe Achane are probably the top 3 running backs on this week, I would guess. Zay Flowers, I think, is back into starting consideration for this week. Very up and down season, but I think I'd be comfortable playing Flowers. I'd even be comfortable to play Bateman in the deepest of leagues, but again, I think there's some better options than Rashad Bateman. I probably would prefer to go, Ray McLeod and Wan'Dale Robinson in the same game. Mark Andrews, you would start him for this week. Isaiah Likely, I would not be trying to start him. Isaiah Likely, to me, is just more of a leech to the Mark Andrews value than somebody I'm really considering putting into my fantasy lineup at all. Justin Tucker, I think you could go back to playing him this week. He should get a lot of opportunity against the Giants, but man, his value is really tanked in recent weeks. The Ravens defense is one of the best defenses that you can play. In terms of the Giants, Tommy DeVito, I am not starting, but I would not be surprised if he does have a decent game just because of the need to catch up on the Ravens. But DeVito, I'm going to be avoiding. I prefer to go guys like Bryce Young over Tommy DeVito. Tyrone Tracy is an okay start to me. He's got kind of a tough matchup in terms of the run defense, but I think his receptions and his just the need that the team has in terms of getting him involved. There's not a lot of other options that they can go to aside from him, Malik Neighbors, etc. I think that Tyrone Tracy is a great option you can pivot to, but I think in general, there are better running backs that you can go to for this week that I would be trying to start over Tracy. Malik Neighbors, I would be trying. I'd still be playing him. There was a question earlier about Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas Jr., and I would prefer Malik Neighbors. His targets have been crazy over recent weeks, and I think in this particular game against Baltimore with the matchup, I would be trying to play Malik Neighbors in this game. I know he's not been great as of late. He's really has not been giving you the elite value, but he's also not killing you either. Over the last 6 games, he's had at least 10 fantasy points. So all that being said, in this matchup against Baltimore, I think this is a great week to be playing Malik Neighbors. Wan'Dale Robinson, kind of the same thing if you're really in a pinch. I mentioned Wan'Dale earlier as a flex guy that you can consider for this week. So in this matchup, Baltimore has been giving up tons of points to the to the wide receivers. So I think this is a good week as well that you can consider Wan'Dale Robinson. Tight end David Bellinger. I think that's Daniel Bellinger. Sorry. He did get some targets recently. He got 7 targets against New Orleans, but the majority of the season has done absolutely nothing. So I'm really not trying to look that way. And then Graham Gano and the Giants defense, I'm not by any means going to play them. All right, last 1 o'clock game. And you guys got any questions, drop it below. I will get to that first and foremost. All right, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tennessee Titans. And the Bengals, you're going to be firing up all those guys that you typically do. Joe Burrow, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, all those guys you could play this week. Now, the real question mark is what do you do at tight end with Mike Gesicki? And for me personally, I'm going to try to go with other tight ends. Mike Gesicki has really only had viable outcomes this year in fantasy when T. Higgins has not been there. That being said, Gesicki is still a name to keep an eye on. But until anything happens to T. Higgins, I'm going to be sitting Mike Gesicki. Cade York is an okay kicker to play for this week as well. Would not be playing the Bengals defense despite the Will Levis matchup because the Bengals defense is one of the worst in football. Now, the Tennessee side of this game is interesting, though, because Will Levis, I think, is back into streaming consideration. Tony Pollard, let's check on the news of him. He is officially active. So that is good news for the Pollard managers. He is a must start for this week. Tony Pollard, there's some of the names mentioned earlier, like Tyrone Tracy. Tony Pollard would play above him. I think there's a very viable option for him to go above guys like James Cook as well. So Tony Pollard should be a great play this week against Cincinnati. Tajay Spears, more of a name to keep an eye on for later. Probably not going to play him now that Pollard is active. Calvin Ridley, I would start him this week. Nick Westbrook-Akine is another interesting player that I would be trying to start this week if you can get him. He just is outside of that under 40% roster threshold. Otherwise, I would have mentioned him in that name earlier. I believe he's like 44% rostered. That list of guys that I mentioned of wide receivers to start under 40% rostered. If Nick Westbrook-Akine was still under 40%, I would have had him on this list. Getting that Cincinnati matchup. And he did almost get a touchdown last week, which would have added to his insane touchdown totals on the season. I think Westbrook-Akine gets in the end zone again this week. I'd be trying to play him. Chigakonkwo is another interesting tight end name to mention as well. I would be trying to look elsewhere, but if you're really desperate and you're trying to hit a home run, some of those tight ends I mentioned earlier, like Brenton Strange, that's a very good floor tight end if you just need to get some points that won't kill you. But let's say you play Cooper Kupp and you have an Njoku injury and you want to try to hit a home run because you're an underdog. Chigakonkwo is one of the better names you could look at potentially that could go off against Cincinnati. But he also comes with a very low floor as well. Not going to play Nick Folk or the Titans defense, though. All right, so we got about 20 minutes left, so drop any questions that you got in the chat below. And if not, I will go through the rest of these games of who to start and sit. We will start with the Sunday afternoon games. We're going to do New England and Arizona. Drake May, I'm not going to be starting this week, but I do think that he falls into that range of players that is in consideration. He's around like quarterback 15 to 18. So definitely 2 quarterback leagues, probably not 1 quarterback leagues. Ramondre Stevenson. To me, this sets up to him as a game where he has real bust potential. I know Arizona is not great against the run, but I have a bad feeling that Ramondre Stevenson may be scripted out of this game and may dip and give you an under 10 fantasy point performance. So I think you could look at some better options out there. I would probably play Tyrone Tracy over Ramondre Stevenson personally. I would not go so far as to play some of these other guys on the fringe. Like if you're talking about Ramondre Stevenson versus Sincere McCormick, that's a little harder, but I would probably lean Stevenson. Stevenson just comes with such a low floor potential, though, that it really scares me to put him in my lineups. Not going to go with any of these New England wide receivers. Hunter Henry is interesting because of the volume that he gets. I think if you're playing in a full PPR league, Hunter Henry can give you a good safe floor that you could rely upon. And then Austin Hooper, interestingly enough, has been getting involved enough that he's not killing you either. He's had at least 4 targets in let's take a look at this. In 6 out of the last 7 games, he's had at least 4 targets. So Austin Hooper, surprisingly, as the second tight end, is still very involved in New England. So keep an eye out to see if Henry gets injured, because that could really make some things interesting there. Not going to look at the Patriots kicker or defense, though. All right, so for those of you in the chat, we've got under 20 minutes, so ask any questions that you got for these games, and we'll get to that right away in the chat. Kyler Murray, I'd be playing this week against New England. Up and down, but I think this is a week where he'll have an up game. James Conner, I'd be playing him. Marvin Harrison Jr., I'd be comfortable putting him in my lineup again as well. Yeah, he's another very up and down player, but I think this is a good opportunity for him to have a nice game against New England. Michael Wilson as well, same thing. I think there's a good chance that he gets involved and has a nice game. Trey McBride, one of the best tight ends you could have, I'd be playing him. And then I would be as far as to play Chad Ryland of the Arizona Cardinals as the kicker. The defense, the Arizona Cardinals is an okay defense for this week against New England. I think there are some better smash matchups that you can get, but still it's a pretty good defense that I think will finish in the top 10 this week. We've got the Colts and the Broncos. Anthony Richardson, I would not be trying to play against Denver. I think there's a real chance that he struggles in this game, especially given that it's on the road and the defense is pretty solid as it is. I would be trying to go elsewhere than Anthony Richardson, but he's got a great matchup at week 17 against the Giants that I would definitely want to make sure he's rostered for. Jonathan Taylor, I think you could play him for this week, but I'm not really expecting spectacular numbers. Josh Downs is coming back from injury. I think that this is another good player to keep an eye out for to see if he's out there in leagues. May have been dropped coming off the bye. I'd be playing Josh Downs if he's out there. The other wide receivers I would not really be looking at, though. Michael Pittman has had a lot of opportunity over the last few weeks with Josh Downs being out, but really has not taken advantage of it. He's getting the targets, but it's not really translating into the points that you would like. Pittman is kind of in that range of the flex wide receivers that I would be okay playing if you're really in a pinch, but I'd be trying to see if you can get some other guys in there. So a lot of these names I mentioned earlier, like Hopkins, I would prefer to go Hopkins over Michael Pittman. If you got to go all the way down to like Jacoby Myers is another one, I'd rather play Myers than Pittman. Michael Pittman is in that wide receiver 4 range to me that falls into a flex if you're desperate. And then not looking at Alec Pierce or Adonai Mitchell, not looking at the tight ends. Matt Gay is interesting to me because, at altitude, they kick pretty well. And I think Matt Gay has already been a pretty good kicker as it is. Gives you some good performances time to time. So this is an okay stream to look at. Not the Colts defense, though. The Colts defense, though, they get the Giants in week 17. So just keep that in mind as well. Like, this is another good defense to stash for that championship game if you're in a good position to hold players for that particular week. Bo Nix, great start for this week. And again, I've mentioned this several times on the channel. He gets Cincinnati in week 17. So if you have Bo Nix, the matchup next week against Los Angeles is going to be tough, but make sure you hold Bo Nix through that week 17 to lock and load him for the championship game against the Bengals. Not going to play any of these running backs for the Denver Broncos because they're just way too inconsistent. Still thinking Hunter Henry over Jake Ferguson. Okay, so I think that Hunter Henry will get more – he's a safer play. If you're trying to go with, more of a home run play, I would go Jake Ferguson in that matchup with Carolina. It really is kind of depending on what you're looking for. Like if you're the underdog, I would play Jake Ferguson, try to see if you can hit a home run against Carolina. But if you're trying to just play it safe, I would go with Hunter Henry. They're both kind of in that same range to me, like right around tight at 12 to 15 for this week. So if you're favored, go with Hunter Henry to play it safe. If you're an underdog and you're trying to catch up, I'd go with Jake Ferguson. So going back to the Denver Broncos running backs, there's just too much of a timeshare for me to really be interested in any of them. I am most interested though in Estime to see if he does in fact like take over the backfield, because the rookie, he's got the highest upside relative to the three of them. So if I would prefer to have any of them on my bench, I'd prefer to have Estime probably, but I don't feel great about him eventually taking over this backfield. Just something I think there's a higher fantasy ceiling if he is the one that does take over. Cortland Sutton, you're starting without question. Devon Villay is another interesting name that I think you can put back into your starting lineup for this week. But down week against the Browns really kind of lowered the expectations for him. I think he could be okay this week against Indianapolis, though, and I definitely am very interested in Villay for that Cincinnati Bengals championship game matchup in Week 17. Adam Troutman, no, but they keep in mind like the tight end schedule for the Broncos is number one in the entire NFL. So Adam Troutman, just keep an eye out for that name. Not been a great tight end for fantasy this year, but when you got the best matchup like that, he's very intriguing. All right, so we got 5 people in the chat. So we've got 13 minutes until the game starts. So ask any questions that you got below regarding your team, and I'll get to that right away because we only got about 12 minutes until the game starts at 1 o'clock. If you got any other questions too, whether it's like dynasty roster stuff, or if you want to ask about your week 16 and 17 matchups as well, I'm happy to answer that too. Okay. Will Lutz, great kicker for this week, and Denver Broncos, this is a great defense to play for this week, but they have tough matchups in weeks 16 and 17. Okay, full PPR flex question. Tyrone Tracy, Sincere McCormick, or Josh Downs? Since this is full PPR, I would probably go with Josh Downs. I think that is the safest option for you for one. And I think that because you're factoring receptions into the equation as well, I think that Downs has the best opportunity to give you both a good floor and the highest ceiling. I like Tyrone Tracy and Sincere McCormick though, so you got some good options there, especially later. Like Sincere McCormick, as I mentioned earlier in the show, he's got great matchups in weeks 16 and 17, getting Jacksonville and New Orleans. So I'd definitely be moving him into that spot for week 16 and 17. But for this week, Woods Girl, I would go with Josh Downs. So that's all I got for the Colts and Broncos game. We'll go to one of the best games of this week, Buffalo and Detroit. Josh Allen, you're playing. I had a question earlier on my channel about whether or not to play Josh Allen given the matchup with Detroit, but to me, he's just got too high of a ceiling that Josh Downs, sorry, I was thinking Josh Downs because I saw your chat. Josh Allen, this is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. You really do not sit him at all, even though he is playing a team like the Detroit Lions. James Cook, now this is more of a question mark. Cook has been very up and down all season. I think there's better players that you could play than James Cook. James Cook, Tyrone Tracy, going back to that earlier question, I think you could play Tracy over Cook. I would not play Sincere McCormick over James Cook, though. Khalil Shakir, I would play. Amari Cooper, he got a better game last week. He got 14 targets. But I want to see more consistency from Amari Cooper to play him. If you are going to put him in your lineup, this is a good week to do that given the matchup with Detroit. But you're really taking a big risk by playing him. I would rather play Josh Downs than Amari Cooper, for example. I'd rather play DeAndre Hopkins. Some of these other fringe guys that have been out there like Michael Pittman. In that case, I would go Amari Cooper. But he's not a great wide receiver for this week, but he does have a nice matchup. Keon Coleman, great stash potential for future weeks. I'm very interested in him. Dalton Kincaid coming back from injury. This is a big question mark for me. Nervous about starting Brees. Yeah, I get it. He's been disappointing. But like you said with DJ Moore, like I would trust the matchup this week for Breece Hall against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I see Breece having a ton of elite upside this week, so I would definitely. I know it doesn't feel great because he's not really been super reliable on the season, but I really think in this Jacksonville game I could really see him going off. Half PPR, Shakir or Ridley? Okay, so I would prefer to go Calvin Ridley in the matchup against Cincinnati. So I know Khalil Shakir had a great week last week in particular, but I feel that you got Kincaid coming back, so there's a little bit of question marks of what do the short area targets look like. Ridley, though, is locked and loaded as the number one wide receiver on the Titans, and he gets Cincinnati. I think this will be a great week for Calvin Ridley. Yeah. Those are all good points. Like DJ Moore is a good player to consider for this week. The thing that just scares me though with the Bears is there's so many different wide receivers that they can go to. Like you got Rome Odunze, you've got Keenan Allen. I think there's a possibility that DJ Moore gets shut out, which has happened a couple times this season. He does have that elite upside, but I do feel that Breece Hall is safer though. I know he has been dealing with injury, but I do think that they both have their question marks, but I would prefer to trust the matchup with Breece Hall getting Jacksonville this week. And then Mark Andrews or Kmet, I would definitely go Mark Andrews. Cole Kmet to me is way too up and down for me to trust. So what I would do in that situation, Frank, is go with Mark Andrews. No problem, Woods Girl. Sorry, happy to help you out there. Okay, so we got a couple more minutes until the game starts. If you guys got any last minute questions, drop them below, and I'll hang on for a little bit to talk through these last few games as well. Tyler Bass, good kicker stream for this week. Bills defense. Don't drop them because they get the Jets and the Patriots in the week 16 and 17 matchups. I'm not playing the Bills for this week, but I'm checking to see if they're out there. They're one of the best defenses that you can have for those championships, semifinals, and finals. Jared Goff, looking elsewhere at quarterback. He's right around quarterback 15 for me. Probably not trying to play Jared Goff. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, you're playing them just about every week, as always. And I think in this particular game against Buffalo, which has struggled against the run, these guys are some of the best running backs that you can have. Monroe St. Brown, you're playing. Jameson Williams, I would be playing in my flex. To me, Jameson Williams kind of falls into that range among the Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors options, where I would probably prefer to go Neighbors over Jameson Williams and Brian Thomas as well, but probably not go as far down as like a DeAndre Hopkins, for example. I would still prefer to go those guys over Jameson Williams, but Jameson Williams I play over somebody like Hopkins or, Zay Flowers. Another name that comes to mind to me. Tim Patrick had a great game recently. How's he gonna do against Buffalo? I think that this is a more of a DFS play that I wouldn't really want to start, but somebody that I'm interested in. Ridley or Myers? I'm projected to win by 8, but I'm going against Derrick Henry, so I want to chase a ceiling. Okay, so in that case, like I would go with Calvin Ridley. Like Myers does give you a good floor, as you mentioned, but Calvin Ridley is playing the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is one of the best matchups that he can get for a guy that is the number one wide receiver on his team, and I think has top 5 wide receiver on the week potential. So Odyssey G, what I would do is start Calvin Ridley, especially like you said, you're trying to chase a ceiling play in this particular situation. I would go Calvin Ridley. And I really don't think that Calvin Ridley will even give you a bad floor for this week because of that Cincinnati matchup. So to me, it's Calvin Ridley pretty easily over Jacoby Myers. Sam Laporta. Yeah, I mean, there's really not a lot of better tight end options that you can get off waivers to play over Laporta, unfortunately. So, I mean, in this particular game against Buffalo, I think you could be comfortable playing Laporta, but I mean, I'm still preferring those other guys like Jonnu Smith if you happen to have both, no problem, anytime. But yeah, like Laporta he's just, what he gives you is touchdown. If he gives you a touchdown, you're happy. If he does not, you're pretty disappointed. Unfortunately, that's how it is with most tight ends, though. So you really don't have a lot of other pivots. But I still would prefer the guys like Jonnu Smith, like just trying to think through some other names, for example, of guys you could pivot to. Zach Ertz, like, probably still goes Sam Laporta in that case, but he's kind of right around that tight end 10 in terms of production, with a very high ceiling, but also a very low floor as well. Jake Bates, one of the better kickers you can get, and Detroit's defense I'm going to be sitting. Okay, so we got our last afternoon game, Pittsburgh and the Philadelphia Eagles Battle of Pennsylvania. Russell Wilson, this is not a great week to play Russell Wilson. He's got some better matchups later on that I like. So I think you could definitely pivot from Russell Wilson this particular week, but hold on to him for some of those later matchups that he has later this season, which will be a lot better. So if you got any last minute questions, drop them below for those of you in the chat. If not, I'll continue through these games that are coming up here for the late window. Najee Harris, don't love him for this week. I'm actually a little higher on Jaylen Warren having a better game because of the need to use the pass catching running back. Philadelphia's got a great run defense, and I think that in this particular game they may utilize their third down back more. How are you doing in fantasy leagues? So I have a couple leagues. Like, some of them are doing pretty well. I'm going to be honest, though. Like, I had a couple leagues where I was, like, high on Cooper Kupp. So Thursday really, like, devastated me, man. That was, like, rough. He just had, like, 0 points. But I'm hopeful that some of my other guys can kind of help elevate the ceiling to make up for Cooper's performance, man. Because that was just, like, that's always rough when it's like you have that Thursday night game and then you just have like an absolute dud like that. But I'm hopeful that I can recover, though. We'll see how these games go today. But overall, I'd say my teams are doing pretty good this season. And in the same Pittsburgh game, so no George Pickens. So, there's got to be somebody that's like stepping up as the pass catcher. Who is it going to be? In DFS, I would look at Calvin Austin and Mike Williams, and they are good stashes for the time being to continue to, keep an eye on, especially if Pickens does not get healthy. I'm more interested in these guys for the week 16 and 17 matchups, though, when they get Baltimore and then when they get Kansas City. So in this particular game, though, against Philadelphia, which is a good pass defense, I'm not interested in playing Calvin Austin or Mike Williams. Pat Freiermuth, though, is in start consideration. And we talk, the Sam Laportas of the world. Freiermuth, I would play over Laporta for this week if you happen to have both of them, because he's got a great matchup in this particular game against Philadelphia, for one. And then two, they just don't have a lot of other guys that they can rely upon with Pickens being out. Freiermuth has been excellent the last 2 weeks, too. And he has a top 10 schedule among tight ends, as I talked about in a video earlier this week that you could check out that I dropped on Friday. Jalen Hurts, play him. You're playing him every single week, as is. Saquon Barkley, same thing. Make sure you stash Kenneth Gainwell, especially if you own Saquon, or if you're the opponent of Saquon, because if he gets injured, then you've just stolen the number one running back. That's going to be stepping into his role should anything happen to him. A.J. Brown has been down as of late, but I do feel confident that you could play him again for this week and he'll be fine, despite the Pittsburgh matchup. I'd go A.J. Brown over the Pickens, Neighbors, etc., those names that were all talked about earlier. Or not Pickens, Neighbors and Brian Thomas, I'm sorry. Devonta Smith, yeah, I guess you could play him this week, but I don't love him. He's been up and down majority of his career. I think you could get away with playing him, though, but he wouldn't be up there with, like, you had Jameson Williams versus Devonta Smith. I would go Jameson Williams. Grant Calcaterra, a very underrated tight end name who has played well when Dallas Goedert has been out. I think Calcaterra is a great play again for this week. Jake Elliott as a kicker, don't love him. Philadelphia Eagles defense, I think this is an okay week to play them against Pittsburgh, especially since they don't have Pickens. But more so, the Eagles matchup against the Cowboys in Week 17 is where they're really going to shine. So they're a good defense to hold on to, but I think there are some better options you could look at for this week. All right, so I did lie. There is another afternoon game I got to cover. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Los Angeles Chargers. Baker Mayfield, this is a good week to be playing Baker despite the matchup with the Chargers. Not over guys like Tua, but he is still a good play. Bucky Irving is questionable for this game. As of 8 minutes ago, the sleeper update is that Irving back hip is feeling much better than last week, even though his status and practice progression appears similar. I don't know what that says, but basically he's still questionable. And if you are in a position at this point, you know the 1 o'clock games have already happened, but do not plan on Bucky Irving playing. If he does not, try to get Rachaad White, but he's probably rostered. Sean Tucker is a desperation guy that you can pivot to. But if not, among these same games that are starting around the same time, you could look into Jaylen Warren potentially, Zach Charbonnet, check if he's out there. Sincere McCormick is another good option, who's playing Monday night. So just follow up the news on this because Bucky Irving is still not confirmed for playing today. Mike Evans, start him. Jalen McMillan has been playing better, but I would not start him this week against the Chargers. If you had a better matchup, then I would look into that, but not for this week. Cade Otton, because of the target volume that he has been getting as of late, I would feel a little more comfortable playing him. There's obviously been a big drop off with Mike Evans, but I think among other tight ends that you can get, Otton is one of the more safer options that you can look into. Chase McLaughlin this week, I'd be trying to go elsewhere, but I like the fact that he is playing indoors at least. The Buccaneers defense, no, but the Buccaneers defense again gets some great matchups later on that make them an excellent team to hold on to because they get the Cowboys in week 16 and then they get Carolina in week 17. Herbert, great play this week against Tampa Bay. The running backs, as I mentioned earlier, like Gus Edwards is an okay start. Kamani Vidal is a player to stash, and in very deep leagues, I think you can consider starting him, but not a great one. Ladd McConkey. So he is still questionable as well, and there is optimism that he is going to play. So if for whatever reason he does not play, check if Josh Palmer is out there, because I think Josh Palmer could be a great substitute should Ladd McConkey not play. Quentin Johnson, kind of the same thing, but you're expecting a little more volatility with him that I don't necessarily like. Palmer, to me, would be a little bit safer. Stone Smart is another interesting name to keep an eye on in the tight end position should McConkey be unable to go for this week. You've also got Cameron Dicker for the Los Angeles Chargers, who's one of the better kickers you could have playing indoors this week. Running deficiencies. He's probably one of the best kickers for this week in general. Chargers defense, not going to go there, though. All right, so we're running a little low on time here. And obviously, if you guys got any questions for these afternoon games, drop it in the chat. I will cover the remaining 3 games. We'll go kind of rapid fire through that in the next 10 minutes. But if you guys got any questions, drop it below. Doesn't have to be about this week. Can be about other stuff as well. Just let me know in the comments section. Tonight's game is Green Bay and Seattle. Jordan Love, you're not happy with the like high ceiling numbers that he's been putting up as of late, but I think he will be fine for this week to start him. Josh Jacobs, you're starting him. The Packers wide receivers have been kind of a mess. I would say if you have to trust any of them, it would be Christian Watson. Now there really are not like it. If I think given this particular matchup, you can look to Jaden Reed again, but I would be really hesitant to do that. Particularly, you're looking at like some of the Packers wide receivers versus the Bears wide receivers in Minnesota. I'd prefer to go the Bears if you're waiting out until these late games. Prefer to go the Bears against Minnesota in this particular one. Of all the Packers wide receivers, I would go Watson, then Reed, then Dobbs, then Wicks. But the same game, you're going Smith and Jigba and DK Metcalf easily over any of these Packers. Tucker Kraft, this is an okay tight end. Not in the same tier to me as, Henry, Ferguson, Ertz, guys like that. But he is a tight end that's got some upside that I'm interested in for this week. Brandon McManus, tried not to in this game against Seattle. And then Packers defense, I would try to pivot away from as well. Geno Smith, not a great start for this week. He gives you a good enough floor to play in 2 quarterback leagues, but among 1 quarterback leagues, I would be trying to avoid him. Zach Charbonnet is a must start, especially now that Kenneth Walker is not playing. Jackson Smith and Jigba must start. And DK Metcalf, I think you could play him as well, despite some of his recent floors not being great. But I would go Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors over DK Metcalf personally. Noah Fant, well, first of all, Tyler Lockett, I would be trying to sit him. Noah Fant, I'd be trying to sit as well. And then Jason Myers, I think there are just better kickers available out there that are more consistent for you. I'd be looking for the kickers in the dome. Let me just pull up real quick like what the weather is like in Seattle for this particular game. Seattle weather. So it's not supposed to rain, so that's good. A lot of times with the inclement weather, you're kind of like out of options. So I think you probably could get away with Jason Myers for this week, but I think I would just prefer to go the kickers in the dome. And Myers has kind of been got a leg, but has often been prone to either missing field goals or just not really being put in a position to kick field goals because the team converts in the red zone pretty well in general. All right, the 2 Monday night games, we've got Chicago and Minnesota. So a couple questions earlier about what to do with the Chicago receivers, but we'll start with quarterback. Caleb Williams is a desperation quarterback play with high upside. I think if you're trying to shoot for the moon, Caleb Williams is a good option to consider for this particular game. DeAndre Swift, I would be sitting him against Minnesota. He struggles against these good run defenses, and this game is another one of those. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Odunze. So all these guys they all have a high ceiling, but they all have a high floor or a low floor as well because of the targets and the distribution of points. Now, if you want to pick any of them, I would go DJ Moore. But there were some questions earlier about would you go DJ Moore or Breece Hall, and I recommended Breece Hall because of the matchup for Breece. DJ Moore is still a good play if you can put him in there, but I would just prefer that matchup, particularly with running back getting Jacksonville. Packers fan here. Packers traditionally don't do well in Seattle for some reason since the Favre days. Yeah, I'm not really sure why that is because you think that they would be okay with considering that they play in snow in Lambeau, that they would be good with the rain in Seattle, but I mean, I guess the rain is just difficult with you're playing in Seattle. They've got a really good home atmosphere in terms of their fan base, making it a difficult place to play as well. Yeah, I have Jordan Love in some leagues too, so I'm pulling for the Packers to do well tonight. So I'm with you there, Woods Girl, that hopefully they can kind of reverse that curse and play well tonight because I'd like to see a good game, especially on the offensive end with Green Bay. And that's the same league I have Cooper Kupp too, so I need Jordan Love to be making up some points for me in that one. Cole Kmet, there was a question about him earlier. I avoid Cole Kmet pretty much in all fantasy leagues because he's just way too up and down. He gives you a 0 more often than he gives you an actual great game. I just think there's so many better options than Cole Kmet I would look to. No problem, anytime. Cairo Santos, he's playing in a dome, so that's a kicker you can pivot to. Another very interesting point to consider with these kickers is that if you wait until Monday night to play your kicker and you've already won the week, let's say that the only kicker remaining is that Monday night game, you got a kicker. What I try to do is target these kickers that are lightly rostered like Cairo Santos on a Monday night. If I could seal up the win during the week and then drop the kicker to pick up a flex range player that may be available, like a Sincere McCormick in the other Monday night game. That's a little bit harder to do in this situation, though, because there's 2 Monday night games this week, so there's less of a chance that your opponent doesn't have anybody playing on Monday night. But that's an interesting kicker twist that you can try to employ in these late week considerations, is to try to pick up the Monday night kicker, and then if you've already won the week, you could drop that kicker for a position that could help you the following week. Bears defense, I would not be playing them. Sam Darnold, yeah, you got to play him again this week. He's been going off, and in this game against against Chicago, he's going to be going off again this week, I believe, as well. The Bears defense has been okay at times, but Sam Darnold is playing some of the best football among the quarterback position. You got to put him in your lineup again. Aaron Jones, this is a good week to play Jones against a soft Bears run defense. And then Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, both of them must be starts as well. Addison, I don't know if I would go as high as to put him over Malik Neighbors, but I would still put him over Brian Thomas Jr. TJ Hawkinson has not been great as of late, but one of the more talented tight ends in the league. And he's still getting the volume despite it not really turning into fantasy points. So TJ Hawkinson to me is somebody that I'm definitely plugging into my lineup for this week and playing at the tight end position. Will Reichert is coming back from injury, missed a field goal, but I think in this particular game I'd be fine to play him. Minnesota Vikings defense against Chicago, I think you could still play them. But I think there are some better stream matchups that you can look to that I would rather play than the Vikings defense. And then the final game, and then we'll wrap things up in the next few minutes. We've got Atlanta against the Vegas Raiders. Kirk Cousins is a sit despite this matchup because he's not been playing well. And I hope things can change against the Raiders for his sake, but you can't put him in the position to trust him right now in the fantasy playoffs, given how he's playing right now. Bijan Robinson, though, this is must-start running back, and he's got one of the best running back schedules going into the fantasy championship. So there's a real argument that he could be a number one running back, like the number one overall running back, not only on the week, but for the full fantasy playoffs. Drake London, I think you could go back to playing him again. Darnell Mooney, and I actually like Ray McCloud over Darnell Mooney. If you go back to the beginning of my video, I mentioned Ray McCloud as a stream for this week that I like. So I would go Ray McCloud as my top wide receiver that is under 40% rostered. Kyle Pitts, I would not want to play Pitts, but this is a good matchup for him. So if you have him, he may be able to take advantage of this. But I would just prefer to get guys that I know can get more targets, like Zach Ertz, probably Hunter Henry. I know it sounds crazy, but Kyle Pitts is just so much volatility. I just really do not want to trust him. Younghoe Koo, though, this is a great kicker for this week. And another one of those guys, like I said, that you can do the Monday night strategy that I talked about with kickers. Falcons defense against the Raiders got lit up against Minnesota, but I think you can play them against Las Vegas, considering that there's a good chance Desmond Ridder is their starting quarterback. And on the other end, I'm not playing Desmond Ridder even if it's a 2-quarterback league. Sincere McCormick, though, I would be comfortable playing because I think he's going to get good enough volume to be productive in this game on Monday night. Not really looking at the other Raiders running backs, though, unless McCormick happens to get injured. Jacoby Myers is an okay play for this week. The quarterback play is concerning, so it doesn't put Myers into the elite floor of guys that have been talked about earlier. So because of that, I would still prefer to go with I like Myers, but a question earlier was Myers or Tyrone Tracy, and in that case, I would go with Tracy over Myers. Trey Tucker is more of just a stash, as I mentioned earlier. And then Brock Bowers must play him, but keep an eye on Michael Mayer, who I have in my photo as a stash, because I think there's a good chance that Bowers sits end of the season, and Michael Mayer will step into an elite opportunity for a team that uses the tight end as its primary pass catcher. So great sleeper, and he gets Jacksonville next week. So and then New Orleans the following week. So these are both great matchups that if Brock Bowers missed time, Michael Mayer could really be a sleeper. And I'm not saying that because Brock Bowers is injured. I'm just saying that because they may sit him. They're going for Shitter Sanders. They're not going for wins anymore this season. Not playing the Raiders defense or Daniel Carlson either. All right, so that's all that I've got for all the games this week. You got any questions last minute about like any of the other games? Just drop it in the comments section of this video. I'll try to get to as soon as I can. And hope everybody has a great week 15 and has a great first week of the fantasy playoffs. I have a video coming out probably on Monday that will talk week 16 previews. So please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you got any questions, just comment below, subscribe to the channel, and hope you guys win this week. See you guys next time. Bye.